Why were the madhabs created? That is, the Islamic schools of jurisprudence like Maliki and Shafi.
The Quran is a very ambiguous text in its language. And I just finished a broadcast where we talked about this with Ibrahim Khan, who is a former Muslim that left Islam just a couple of months ago. And what he was saying is that in Islam there are words that can have very ambiguous explanations. And that's why it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And that's how it is in Islamic tradition. They had to face different, let's say, legal, historical, and political challenges. And that led them to different interpretations, especially due to the rise of Aristotelian philosophy, which comes in, and also Platonic philosophy to some extent, which enters into what Islam is. Because the texts are translated from Greek to Latin and from Latin. They reach the hands of the Arabs, and a whole range of thinkers begins, from Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, and all of them, and Ibn Sina and various others start to emerge. Conceptual divergences arise about how to understand the Quran, and from there, schools of thought begin. Even from the beginning, there were different ways to understand the Quran, right? All of that opens up the hadith in many places, but it's because of the divergence that the Quran creates due to the ambiguity of its language and how certain words can be understood. Because there are things that you see in the Quran, and it either means nothing or it means a lot, and it depends on how it's explained. And it's from those intellectual differences that these schools appear. Those are the ones you mentioned.
Yes, talking about the Hanbali school seemed interesting to me because that's where Ibn Taymiyya comes from.
Correct? Ibn Taymiyya was a scholar of the Hanbali school, as you said, maybe one of its greatest exponents. And what stands out to me, for example, is that the Hanbali school has no claim over the land of Israel. That is, the Hanbalis do not say that they are the ones who should conquer Jerusalem, unlike other schools in Islam that claim to have some right or divine mandate over Jerusalem. Ibn Taymiyyah explicitly writes that the Haram al-Sharif, which is the area where the temple is located, has nothing to do with Islam. So that's why it really catches my attention that there are positions within Islam itself where Jerusalem can be negotiable. And that's why I believe, and that's what I was talking about in the last live, that if people were to come and take certain Islamic thinkers such as Ibn Rushd or things from Ibn Taymiyyah and could reinterpret Islam from here. That is, to reform Islam, could Islam become a religion? A suitable one, instead of continuing to be the religion that has so many problems now with Judaism. How can this be done? Islam used to have an idea called ijtihad, which is a force of innovation in Islam. They used to have this ability to interpret Islam, but they no longer have this ijtihad, so they ended up with a rigid religion with very old frameworks that are not applicable in modern times. The world has advanced a lot ethically, ideologically, and philosophically, and they are stuck in a religion from many centuries ago. So, if they had the ability to accept ijtihad again, maybe they could reform Islam without any problem. So, this is where power lies in Islam. Interestingly, there were Jewish thinkers like Netanel al-Fayumi, who was a great scholar, one of the leaders, in what is known as Yemen, which is in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. And he writes that Muhammad, he could easily be considered a prophet who was sent to the Arabs. What's more, Maimonides, who is one of the great thinkers of the people of Israel in recent centuries and millennia, there's even a saying that goes, from Moses to Moses there was none like Moses. What does that refer to? That from Moses of Sinai to Moses son of Maimon, who is Maimonides, there was no other figure of such stature. And Maimonides writes in a letter called Igaret Tayman, which is a letter to the Jewish community of Yemen. He writes that prophets were given to the nations, that prophets were given to Ishmael, and prophets were given to Esau, which prophet was given to Ishmael. So, there one could open the door to making Muhammad kosher, to koshering Muhammad, because that is one of the great grievances that Islam has towards Judaism. They say to us, how is it possible that you don't believe that Muhammad was a prophet? Well, there are sources that one could use to make it kosher. I'll give you another source. It is written at the end of the book of Deuteronomy that there was no prophet like Moses. There was no prophet in Israel like Moses. And the sages of Israel ask, what does it mean that there was no prophet in Israel like Moses? The phrase should have been, there was no prophet like Moses. Why does it say there was no prophet in Israel like Moses? And the sages answer, no, it's because among the nations of the world there were also prophets. For example, Balaam in Spanish, who is a character found in the book of Numbers, chapter 24 or 25, who speaks about visions he has concerning Israel, and he was not from Israel. Balaam was not, let's say, Jewish or Israelite, nothing like that, but he had the power of prophecy. That is to say, and this is also written by Maimonides in his commentary on the Mishnah in the chapter of Sanhedrin, chapter 10, which is called Perek Helek. He explains in his Mishnah commentary that prophets existed for other nations too, and non-Jews who follow the Noahide laws can share in the world to come, providing an extensive discussion. And that's why, from a Jewish perspective, there wouldn't be a problem, so to speak, with thinking that Muhammad could have received some kind of revelation. What is the problem that lies here? And that's why the discussion about the different schools of Islam is very appropriate, because the separation is that Muslims say that the Torah was distorted. That is, if they started from the point that the Torah was not distorted, Judaism would have no problem with the idea of Islam, in the sense that it could have been some kind of revelation of some sort. But the moment Islam starts to say, no, it's that the Jews distorted it, because what is the argument that Islam has? They say that in the Bible, in the Torah, it was written, in the original Bible, according to them, the name of Muhammad was written. And what the wicked Jews did was erase his name and distort the Bible to hide it. Some traces of Muhammad remain. That argument, similar to the Oedipus complex, I'm not sure if you've read about it. It's another one from Freud, but about the mythology of Oedipus, who wants to kill his father to be with his mother, something like that. Islam wants to kill the root from where it came, because Islam came from Judaism and also from certain sections of Christianity. I have a video on my page where I explain some of the midrashim that were taken by Islam. And in the Quran, when you read the Quran as an Orthodox Jew, you can clearly see that they took from the midrash and the Talmud, and that's how they assembled what is the Quran. That's why, as I tell you, there are many things that are very close between the ideas in the Quran, but of course there are other things that are not. About the superiority complex over others and all those things, the violence, these are things that could be improved, of course. But in Islam, there are many branches that can, some of these branches contribute to bringing people who believe in Islam closer to Judaism. And one of those, as you mentioned, is Ibn Taymiyya. Yes, in Islam, they have all the Hanbali branches, and Ibn Taymiyya explicitly tells them that Jerusalem has nothing to do with Islam. And Muslims shouldn't have any claim. For example, Solomon's temple remained in Israel. And so maybe if Muslims had a more open mind, instead of being... Because remember that Muslims, during a certain historical period, had very great philosophers, Ibn Rushd, about belief, let's say, a more rationalized belief in God and things like that. But Islam today is not like that. Islam abandoned its intellectual side a long time ago and remained in the traditional part, because the Muslim Brotherhood succeeded in its anti-Western schemes. But if Islam once again had that intellectual character and accepted scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, there would no longer be war with Israel, because Islam would have no claim against or for obtaining Jerusalem. And that, for example, there are schools like in the United Arab Emirates that follow the Hanbali tradition, and that's why they have no problem making peace with Israel, because they have no claim over Jerusalem. So what I want to say is that what you mentioned is a very important topic, and I thank you for bringing it up, because I believe that Islam can indeed be saved if they have the concept of Noahide laws and have an approach to what the Torah is. Because I would love to do this project of taking the Quran and showing them the sources in the Quran that were taken from the Jews. For example, there is a text in the Quran that says that whoever takes a life, it is as if he killed the whole world. Muslims often say how beautiful Islam is. Taking a life is like killing the whole world. That phrase comes from the Talmud's tractate Sanhedrin. It's written right here behind me, and it belongs to us. The Talmud was compiled before the Quran, and what does that mean? That Islam explicitly took this source from Judaism. So there are many things that one could explain to a Muslim. Look, this thing that's written about, for example, in the Quran, it says that Allah took the mountain over Israel to force them to accept the Torah. That is a midrash that Hashem put, that he put Mount Sinai over Israel so that they would accept the Torah. Entonces, but what's the big difference? For example, in Islamic literature, when they describe paradise, for example, they describe that there are rivers of honey and rivers of wine and rivers of oil. Islam took it literally. So the problem with taking it literally is that they believe that when they go to paradise and when they become shaheeds and martyrs and all that, they will literally have rivers of wine and will be able to get drunk like they couldn't get drunk on earth. But if they knew that the Midrash that says that, because the Midrash and the Yalkut Shimoni say that, then it's not referring to literal rivers. It's a different idea. So if someone explained to Islam that the root of their religious beliefs is Israel, I think a lot of things would be resolved. And that's why it's written in the Torah that when Sarah expels Hagar, or well, Sarah tells Abraham to expel Hagar, and Abraham expels Hagar, who was the mother of Ishmael. Well, before the expulsion, God asks Hagar, "What are you doing?" And she says, Mipne gibirti ani bogajat, which means before the face, that is in front of my mistress, I am escaping. Hagar tells God that she is escaping from Sarah. That is what Islam suffers from today. They are escaping from their root, from their mistress, who is Sarah, which is the Torah, which is Judaism. Every time Islam denies its Jewish root, because the root of Islam is Jewish, Islam took from Judaism and also from Christianity, and Christianity comes from Judaism, it's no secret. If they return to their root, which is what Hagar says, Mipne gibirti ani bogajat, I am escaping from my mistress. The Quran tries to escape from its root. When they return to their root, when they come back and understand that the Torah was not distorted, and that they, in fact, if they had the Noahide understanding of the Torah, we could have a redeemed Islam, and that would be, with Hashem's help, the new branch of Islam, which we might call the Hagarites. And in fact, they exist. There is, let's say, a more reformed Islamic group called the Hagarites, who are precisely Muslims that want to return to the Jewish understanding of Islam. Let's put it that way. So your comment was very appropriate.